All right, we're going to start off with some definitions. These are terms that may be familiar to you, but just because they're going to come up over the course of the night, I just want to go through some of those. When we talk about categories of federal jobs, thank you for sacrificing for the cause there. There are two very broad categories of federal jobs, and I'm oversimplifying a little bit here, but just for the purpose of discussion, there are merit promotion positions and there are positions that are open to the public. If it's a merit promotion job, that means basically that you need to be a current permanent federal employee or a former permanent federal employee in order to apply. In USA Jobs, you'll see those listed as federal employees competitive service. And there are a couple scenarios whereby you can apply for a merit promotion job if you're not permanent. We'll get into that a little bit later. But just for the 30,000 foot level for now, when we say merit promotion, we mean that you need to be a current or former permanent employee to put in for that. The second category may be the ones that a lot of you are interested in. If you don't currently have a permanent job, these are the ones that are open to the public, and it will say open to all U.S. citizens, and I'll show you a screenshot a little bit later. So you got your merit promotion jobs open to current employees, current permanent employees, the ones that are open to the public, and then inevitably you'll hear us use the term CERT. A CERT is just a shorthand way of saying Certificate of Eligibles. Basically, once you apply for a job, once HR rates and ranks those positions, that is the list of eligible folks who are then forwarded to the hiring officials. So when we say that you made the CERT, that means that you applied for the job, HR determined that you met the minimum qualifications and that you scored high enough for that particular group. So basically, that's just the list of names that gets forwarded on to the hiring official. Okay, a couple different categories of positions. You will hear me say seasonal. Seasonals are near and dear to my heart. I spent 6 years of my life as a seasonal. We're in many ways, we're doing a lot of this for you folks because you're the ones who we want to help if you're interested to get into a permanent job. When we say seasonal, technically they are temporary positions. The proper way to describe them is temporary, but colloquially we just call them seasonal positions. Those are now, it's changed over the years, but those cannot exceed 1,039 hours. 1,039 hours comes out to be right about 6 months, about 26 weeks. So these are the positions that many of you are familiar with. There's another form of position which is almost like a hybrid between a seasonal and a permanent job, and that's what's called a term position. You will see term positions out on USA Jobs fairly often. They are at least 1 year in length, but no more than 4 years in length. So there can be some real benefits of a term position. For one thing, you're getting a full year of employment. There is the potential, not the guarantee, but there is the potential for it to be extended for up to 4 years. One of the catches with the term is that it does not confer permanent government status. So if you're in a term position, that does not qualify you to apply for merit promotion jobs. But you're getting a lot of good experience, and potentially, if things go well, it could get you as long as 4 years. So in the right situation, that might be something that's attractive to you. PFT, or permanent full-time positions, that means a permanent job where you work year-round. You have 52 weeks of employment throughout the year. And then there is the final category, which old-timers like me will inevitably say subject to furlough. That's not the correct term. Technically, they're called career seasonal positions. But a career seasonal or subject to furlough means the same thing. It simply means a permanent job where you have a certain amount of the year in non-pay status. And that can be anywhere from one pay period to, is it 1 or 2 now?
It's 2 weeks to 6 months.
Anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. So that it is a permanent job, but there is you take that job understanding that you will be in non-pay status for a portion of the year. All right, so if we were doing this workshop 5 years ago, this slide would not be here. And this is something that really is a game changer. It's something that for all of you who are in seasonal positions, this is far and away the single biggest lifeline, the option that you really need to be familiar with. I'm going to go through it point by point because it gets a little bit convoluted. Don't feel like you need to understand it all the first time. The handouts that we send you will cover it in more depth. and we're certainly more than happy to answer questions later on. But this is what's known as the Land Management Workforce Flexibility Act, LMWFA. Came into being about a little less than 5 years ago. And what this does is, to kind of cut to the chase, after a certain amount of seasonal service, you now have the ability to apply for permanent merit promotion positions once you reach 24 months of service. So I didn't say that particularly well, so let's go line by line. First of all, it applies to temporary service with these 6 agencies. We're obviously not the most special, but we're the first one on the list. All wonderful agencies, land management agencies, all of whom hire a heck of a lot of seasonal employees. So that's why these are listed. If you work in a temporary position with NPS, BLM, Fish and Wildlife, those other agencies listed there, if you work a total of 24 months cumulatively in either a seasonal or a term position, so that might be 3, 4, 5 years, as long as you get 24 months of cumulative service without having a 2-year break in service. As soon as you have a 2-year break in service, it basically resets the clock. But once you accrue 24 months of cumulative service, you then have the ability to apply for merit promotion positions, even though you're not in a permanent government position. This is huge. I mean, I cannot overstate how big this is, because now all the time that you're building up as a seasonal actually does have a way of being credited toward being able to apply for permanent positions. So I'm going to stop and take a breath, because I know that's a lot of numbers and it's kind of a mouthful. Any questions on this up to now, what I've shared on this? All right. So the next thing is, once you realize that you have these 24 months, the other piece you want to be really careful about is how to document. And there are 2 things that you need to show. You need to show acceptable performance, and you need to show the SF50s stating that you actually have that 24 months of service. So one of the requirements is that performance has to be acceptable. So you do want to make sure you get an EPAP, Employee Performance Appraisal Plan. There you go. You do want to make sure you get those. Those are important anyway. Every employee should have one, whether you're a seasonal or permanent. That will be your documentation that you have acceptable performance. The other thing you're going to want to do, we can talk at the break if you have questions about it, but your SF50, your notification of personnel action, you want to keep those, because when you go to apply for an LMWFA job, you need to show all your SF50s for the beginning and the end of each season. So let's say I was a seasonal at Yosemite from summer of 16, 17, and 18. I need to show SF50s from Yosemite from, say, May 2016 to September 2016, May 2017 to September of 17, and then May of 18 to September of 18. You've got to document to the HR specialist that you in fact have that 24 months of experience. It was easier way back in the old days. You would actually get a hard copy paper SF50 in the mail. We don't do that anymore. So if you're not familiar with the term EOPF and you're not sure how to get into your EOPF, talk to us, talk to your HR person, talk to your admin folks in your park, because that's something you're going to want to do before your season ends. You're going to want to download those SF50s. There are other ways of getting them, but that is by far the easiest. So just remember that for documentation, you need to be able to prove acceptable performance, and you need to have the SF50s to be able to document them. All right. The rest I'm going to go through faster, but this, just because this is such a game changer for those of you who are seasonals, we're going to go into this in more depth. And here's the one that I'm hearing doesn't always work perfectly. This eligibility applies to any federal agency. So the temporary service that you use to get to the 24 months must be with one of these 6 agencies up here. However, the eligibility applies to merit promotion positions with any federal agency. I think the challenge we're running into is that not all agencies are familiar with exactly how this works. But in theory, your seasonal time with NPS, if it reaches 24 months, could apply to a merit promotion position with FBI or another agency. So that may be an avenue if that's something that you're interested in. So, pathways. This is where I'm going to start to go really, really quick. But what I want you to focus on is, as I go through these different categories, just kind of make a mental note. Do you fall into any of these categories? Or are there any of these things that might be relevant to you? The Pathways program, if you've been around a while, you might recall the old SCEP and STEP hiring authorities. Basically, Pathways is the successor to SCEP and STEP, but it's not exactly the same in some important ways. There are 3 different types of Pathways positions. There's the internship, there's the recent graduate, there's the presidential management fellow. 2, I believe, of our panelists actually got into their permanent positions through Pathways. So this is definitely something to look at. For the internship in Pathways, there are 2 types of pathways. There's what's called definite pathways, meaning it's a finite end. It has a finite end at the end of the season. And then there was what's called indefinite pathways that can lead to permanent positions. Indefinite pathways are a really, really good deal because at the conclusion of completing the Pathways program, at the conclusion of your degree, you then acquire 120 days where you can be non-competitively appointed to a permanent position. So this is a very, very attractive option if you're able to land one of these. It's not a guarantee, but it gives you that non-competitive eligibility for 120 days. So some do have that pathway to permanent, others are strictly temporary positions. You'll get excellent experience, but there is no guaranteed progression to a permanent job. 2 others, you don't see as many of those out there, but the recent graduate program, that's if you graduated within the last 2 years from undergrad or graduate program. And then the Presidential Management Fellow program, which is a very prestigious program for master's candidates. And we're going to hear a little more about the PMF program, so remember that one later as well. If you are a veteran, there are some wonderful opportunities. So first of all, thank you for your service and thank you for what you've contributed to our country. There are some tremendous opportunities to get into the federal government through different types of veterans hiring authorities. They're spelled out more at this website, fedshirevets.gov. One of the misconceptions that I want to call out, veterans preference only applies to jobs that are open all sources. In other words, jobs that are open to all U.S. citizens. That veterans preference works for those types of jobs, but that veterans preference, once you're in for a merit promotion job, for a job that's only open to permanent government employees, veterans preference does not apply in that case. But to get that initial job in the government, there are some tremendous opportunities there. There's 2 other types of appointments that I'm going to call out. There's the VRA and the VEOA. If these apply to you, or if you think they may apply to you, it's definitely worth your while to talk to one of us at the break because these are wonderful opportunities. The first is the VRA appointment. Make a long story short, if you've been separated within the last 3 years, you can be non-competitively appointed to a position up to a GS-11. So this is for somebody who has left the service fairly recently. VRA would be within the last 3 years. The VEOA doesn't have the same kind of time restriction. Basically, if you have at least 3 years of military service, the VEOA allows you to apply to merit promotion positions. I know that's a lot, but if you're a veteran, if you think this may apply, please come chat with us about that. Public Land Corps, an example would be the Maryland Conservation Corps or some of the SCA, different types of programs. 640 hours, which when you think about it, isn't that long. That comes out to about 16 weeks. 640 hours of service on a youth or conservation corps. There are only limited ones that apply. Age of eligibility is from 16 to 30. I wish my youth extended till 30. It didn't quite go that long for me, but age of eligibility 16 to 30, and it's for 2 years after the completion of your service. So this could be potentially a good way. SCA, I'll send you a list of some of the different organizations that might qualify for that. SCA and Civics Works, which is a local organization up in Baltimore. All right, Schedule A. This is a special hiring authority for folks with any kind of physical, psychological, or intellectual disability. This can be used to get appointment to whether it be a seasonal or a term or a permanent position. It applies at any grade level. It's a 2-year accepted service appointment, which is essentially a permanent job for the most part. And then after 2 years, the permanent appointment can be made without competition. So if that applies to you or anyone you know, that can also be a very good avenue as well. Oh, area of consideration. So again, pay attention to these on the USA Jobs. I have a couple samples toward the end. The area of consideration is critical because you want to make sure you actually qualify for the position before you make the effort to apply. United States citizens, again, this is a review. It's open to all. Veterans preference does apply. So veterans preference is a tremendous benefit for these, open to all U.S. citizens. Merit promotion, again, open to those with permanent government status. To that question, read the area of consideration carefully because it may be all of DOI. It may be just the National Park Service. It may be just the local commuting area. So definitely read the area of consideration, and that's where something like PLC would show up. And veterans preference does not apply to these jobs. So that's one of the misconceptions about veterans preference. It's not, a veteran does not get preference on every single job they apply for their entire career. Typically, once, this is a generalization, but typically once you apply for that first government job, most likely from that point on, you're probably applying for merit promotion jobs. There are exceptions, but usually your subsequent jobs are going to be merit promotion. Veterans preference does not apply in that situation. Thanks so much for doing this. Okay, so I know this one's a little hard to read, but again, this will be in your handouts. This is one that I pulled about 1.5 years ago for our job fair here at Wolf Trap. What Alan is circling right now, it says this job is open to the public. So any U.S. citizen can apply to that. That's a perfect example of what we call the all sources jobs. And then as a contrast, we picked one, a recent graduate. So this is someone who has graduated from an accredited educational institute within the last 2 years. So if you've recently graduated from college or grad school or a vocational program, that's something that you really want to be aware of because you have that time window where you'd be eligible for this. That 2-year period, you'll notice, is extended to 6 years for veterans. So potentially that could be a very good avenue. Resume advice could be an entire session in and of itself. Our Wolf Trap job fairs, if you're interested in seasonal or you have friends who want to be seasonal, just a shameless plug, we do job fairs over the holiday and New Year's breaks. We go into a lot of detail on resume building, but I'm just going to hit a few highlights right now in the interest of time. As you all know, if you've made it through and been hired as a seasonal, you probably know a federal resume is very different from a private sector resume. You would typically have a private sector resume that's 1-2 pages at most. For somebody older, grayer like me, it's not uncommon to have a 15, 20, 25-page resume. And I pity the person who has to read it, but it's just one of those things because you do need to document your experience. A federal resume must be a much more exhaustive document. Even if you're starting out your career, you might find that you need 2 or 3 pages to be able to address the elements of the questionnaire and to really give yourself credit for all that you're doing. You do want to tailor your resume for each vacancy announcement. When you do the questionnaires, any rating that you give yourself, if you say that you're an expert, there has to be something in your resume to actually support the rating that you give yourself. So we all tend to have more or less the same resume, but you may very well find an interpretation job versus a resource management job. You're not going to use exactly the same resume. There may be some tweaks that you want to make to emphasize different areas. You really want to be sure that you demonstrate that you actually meet the qualifications for the position. If you don't meet the minimum qualifications, you could write like Ernest Hemingway. It doesn't make any difference. If you don't meet the minimum qualifications, your resume is not going to be forwarded on. So, for example, if you're applying for a GS5, one of the requirements is either 1 year of education or 1 year, is it GS4?
It's
1 year, two years of
yeah, it's 1 year of
bachelor's
specialized
degree.
experience or a bachelor's degree.
So for GS5, either a bachelor's degree or 1 year of experience. You've got to show, if you don't have the degree or don't have the degree yet, you want to show that you have the requisite experience to meet that position. We can get into that in a little bit more detail one-on-one, but demonstrating that you meet the minimum qualifications is really important. Otherwise, you're never going to make it to the hiring official. We talked about that right there. And try to be specific as much as you can. Obviously, brevity is important to a point because the hiring official is looking at a lot of resumes, but try to give specifics. For example, if you're applying for an intern job, I led tours for up to 50 people. It was an hour long. We went through a historic house. We were talking about protecting resources. It's important to give some specifics to back up the back up the qualifications that you're claiming. And then that's the balancing act, and that's a hard thing to do. You want it to be thorough. You don't want to leave important things out, but at the same time, you want to make it easy to read. So things like bullets, not having sentences that are 15 lines long. Try to make it readable. Try to make it digestible for the person on the other end, who has to not only read your application but potentially read maybe 100 others. So it's finding that right balance between thoroughness and readability. Oh, and then use bullets. This is an example. This is from a document which I'm going to send you if you share your email. Back in, I think, 2013, one of the parks out west created what I think is the best federal resume guidance that I've seen. And they give a sample resume. There's nothing sacred about this. You certainly don't need to follow this. But you can see it's readable. When you look at this, you're not thinking, oh, I have to sit here and read 30 pages of this. It's formatted well, it looks neat, it looks crisp, and there's some really good feedback and some ideas of how you may want to structure your resume.